Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the final meeting of the Triangle Area SQL Server User Group for the year 2021. We have with us a regular. You may know her from many different places, Mala Mahadevan. Welcome, Mala.
Good evening, everyone.
And I'm going to hand it right off to you. I don't have any announcements for tonight, except that hopefully you have a great rest of your year, and we will talk again sometime in January. But we could do that closing remark at the end. So please, Mala, take it away.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for taking time to join us during this holiday season. I'm going to be talking today on finding T-SQL anti-patterns with ScriptDOM. The original title was actually Finding and Fixing T-SQL anti-patterns with ScriptDOM, but this fixing part of it is kind of small. There are some issues with that, but I'll still show you it's not a big part of this. The major part is about understanding what this tool is and finding patterns using it. So let's get started. You will be hearing a lot of new terms if you are a transactional DBA like I was and unfamiliar basically with programming very much. So be ready for that. It is actually not half as bad as it sounds. It's a really simple, easy tool to use and very useful. So let's get started. This is a little bit about me. Like Kevin said, you see me here every week, so not a lot is needed in this regard. I've been part of this community for a very long time, since 1999 when I started working on SQL Server. I have been working with Channel Advisor Corporation in the Raleigh area for the past 4 years. Before that, I used to live in Louisville, Kentucky. I used to run SQL Saturdays and the user group there. This is a personal request from me. Last year and the year before have been extremely hard. I lost 4 very dear family members to this horrible virus going around. So I ask that you please take good care of yourself and stay healthy through this holiday season. Thank you. So the takeaways from today's presentation are going to be, what is this thing? ScriptDOM has been around for a very long time, but few people even know that it exists. So my goal is to help you understand what it is and why it is useful. And then we'll look at some simple PowerShell scripts using ScriptDOM that will help us identify coding anti-patterns. And then basically we'll learn pros and cons and a comparison with similar tools, a little bit of that. So let us start first with what do we mean by anti-patterns? Anti-patterns are essentially things that are intended to solve a problem, but eventually people find out that it is really not the best way to do it, or it ends up leading to other problems. They are pretty widely used and they do have some legitimate uses. Some common examples of anti-patterns are, for example, select star. Now select star is, it has its place. If you use select star in an if statement, if you use select star to insert into a temp table and places like that, it really does not do anything bad. But if you get into the habit of using it for everything instead of specifying exactly what you want, then it becomes a problem. So that's kind of an example of what an anti-pattern is. And we have, in the SQL Server world, we have a wide range of anti-patterns that we can look at, and I have listed some of them, the simple ones out here. And there may also be a number of anti-patterns that are valid for you or your specific work environment, and they do not have to make sense to anybody else. Like for example, where we work, we use a lot of query store. So query store, typically it has a problem with plan forcing when you have unnamed primary key constraints. So we try to avoid that and we use a unique index instead. But that is kind of like, there is nothing actually wrong with using an unnamed primary key constraint, but because of the specific environment that we are in, we like to avoid that to the extent we can. So naming standards are another. You may have very specific naming standards for your environment that may not make sense to somebody else. So a lot of these things are very specific to your environment, and some of them may be, general best practices. So these are some examples. So let's get into what is ScriptDOM exactly. Now, this is a tool that is fondly called by Microsoft PMs as a Swiss Army knife because it can do a lot of things. It has been around for a really long time, and the DOM in this name, thanks to Kevin, I learned that it stands for Document Object Model, and it comes from the JavaScript world. What ScriptDOM actually is a T-SQL script object model. It is a .NET framework library. It was created, way back in 2008 by a team of developers with a gentleman named Gerd Drapers, who I think is still with Microsoft. It was part of the Visual Studio .NET back then, and internally owned by Microsoft for a long time. And it was Gerd who made it public later on. And currently, it is part of the DACFX package that you can download and install. So, what can this thing actually do? It can do a number of things. It can parse your T-SQL scripts and find any parsing errors that you may have, syntax errors mainly. It can format T-SQL scripts according to some general standards that are customizable. The third use is probably the most important usage there is, that is to find anti-patterns in code. And the last is it can fix some of them, and this is somewhat limited, this last usage. But it is an excellent tool for all these reasons, that is for parsing your T-SQL scripts and for finding anti-patterns. Mainly those are its key uses. So when is it most useful? Why, most of us are used to parsing our scripts in SSMS. We just click the right arrow when you're writing code, and you make sure everything is okay and good to go. So why do you exactly? And if you want to find patterns, you can use other ways of doing it. So when is this most useful? This is typically useful when you have a really large T-SQL code base that legacy code that's been around for a very long time, and you want to find issues before the script is actually deployed into your SQL Server environment. And you also do not want to write DMV queries or various things that will create a lot of stress on the servers when you're trying to find stuff. So you want something that is asynchronous. So these are typically scenarios where you may find ScriptDOM useful with finding coding patterns. So why not use DMVs or text searches instead? Now, what is the biggest advantage of ScriptDOM over any of this is, like I said in the earlier slide too, it finds problems before the objects are created, and it is a really scientific method that is reliable compared to a text search that can give you a false positive. When you're searching for a nolock hint, for example, it's going to tell you if that nolock hint is in a comment. It's going to be somewhat ambiguous about the location of what it finds. All those things, you can avoid all those things when you use a scientific method like this. Like, that is, you will not get any of those things with it. And the third and the biggest advantage too is that it's version compatible. You don't There is a specific parser version for each version of SQL Server, so you don't have to worry about modifying your searches to suit whatever version of SQL Server you're running on. ScriptDOM has that intelligence built in. It is version backward compatible for as far as it can go into 2008. So these are some of the significant advantages you have compared to the traditional methods that most of us use. And DMB searches or text searches definitely have their place. In most cases, people prefer to use easy ways, but this is for specific scenarios where you have to find large volumes of code in an asynchronous manner, and perhaps add to your code quality, your code reviews, or whatever process you have for that. It is useful in that regard. So installing ScriptDOM, you can, it's really easy to install. You can go to the link for that link that I have as part of my presentation. You can just go and install it. The DACFX package, if you install it, comes with that. There is a separate version for .NET Core and .NET Framework, and the one that I have used is the second one. And all you need for this purpose is that just that one DLL that I have listed. That is the default location. Of course, the number differs based on which version of SQL Server you're on, but that's where it puts it by default. If you grab that one DLL and you paste it anywhere else where you want to do your parsing and your code reviews or whatever, it will work just fine. All it needs is that one library right there. So there is no SQL Server install or anything necessary for this. All you need to do is to download and install that thing. And before I get into a demo on the simple parsing that you can do, let's look at the basic structure. So the namespace is called that what I listed out. It's Microsoft.SQL Server.TransactSQL.ScriptDOM. It's a really big namespace. It has well over 1,000 classes as of now. All the T-SQL constructs are part of it, and it keeps growing with every version. So some of the important classes, the main one is the parser. This is the one that tells you whether or not your code is legitimate enough even to find patterns, whether it has any syntax errors or any problems with it. It has the version of the parser goes all the way down to 80. The latest is 170 based on your SQL Server compatibility level. So you can choose whichever one you want to use. And then the next one is a T-SQL fragment, which is an abstract class, and it's a parent class for several other classes. This T-SQL fragment is what it contains your what you call an abstract syntax tree, and I'll get to that in a second. This is what we use to find the nodes are what we use to find the patterns. And the next one is also T-SQL fragment visitor, which is an easier way of finding patterns. We will try to understand that too to the extent we can. And the last one is what is the script generator. The script generator is the one that formats the scripts and does a whole bunch of other stuff. When you want to fix whatever you find, then you need the help of the script generator as well. This is also very version specific. It goes from 170 to 110 all the way back. And then the other classes include specific language based statement classes, and there is a huge number of them. If you look at the docs help on this, it's mind boggling. There are so many classes, and some examples that I've stated here is like for every T-SQL element there is a class. Example is a name table reference or a select star expression, and there is a number of them. It goes on and on and on. But the important ones that you have to be using in order to find patterns are the ones that I have listed right here. These are the main classes that we'll be looking at. So let's look at a demo of the parser first. Anyone has any questions, Kevin?
There are no questions so far, but if you do have questions, folks, put it in chat and I will pass them along to Mala at opportune times, like actually would have been here right now.
Okay. So what you do, the first step is to add the reference to the DLL that we just downloaded. You can put it wherever you like. In my case, I put it there. And then I create what is a parser object, which is a new instance of the parser class, which I just showed. Now I'm using SQL Server 2017, so my parser number is 150, and anybody can use, whatever version you choose to use is fine, depending on what you have. And then I initiate an error class, which is instance, which is to hold any parsing errors if I have. So now I read whatever. This is just a stored proc that I pulled from wide world importers. And what I'm going to try to do is to introduce a couple of syntax errors here for this thing to find. So I'm going to remove this maybe, and I'm going to just say I missed an N in the inner. And then I'm going to run what I'm going to do is basically ask the parser to parse this whatever I'm stringing and throw the errors into this parse errors object. And if there are no errors, it will parse as green. If there are errors, it's going to tell me what those errors are. So I'm going to run this. So here I go. I have errors, and it's going to tell me that line 32 where I removed that from, it's saying it's an incorrect syntax near orders, and then here it is saying it doesn't understand what this funny word is. So if I correct those two things, and there we go, no parsing errors. So basically, these are the few lines you need to check if your code is actually free of syntax errors. Now, it's important to remember here that this is an asynchronous parsing. So if you have an issue like your table doesn't exist, but you've named a field wrong or something like that, it's not going to be able to find those things because it's not connecting to any SQL server here. All it is doing is to checking actively for syntax. So any syntax errors you have, it will find like this. And if you have a large volume of some old code that you haven't checked in a while, then this is a really easy way. It's just 4 lines of code, and you can make small modifications to run it across multiple files if you choose to, and find parsing errors like this. So this is how you get easiest way to get started with ScriptDOM, is to use it to parse your code and find errors. And the output of this parser, this parsed objects, this is what we call a T-SQL fragment, or this holds what is an abstract syntax tree that will help us to find patterns. So let's look at that a little bit more. So what exactly is an abstract syntax tree? Now, an abstract syntax tree is a representation of the code you have in a tree form, with the nodes holding each, what do I say? Each part of the code, there's a node, and it has properties and methods associated with it. And so it's a representation of the code. Whatever you code that you pass to it is created in the form of a tree, and you use this tree to find, each node would contain specific properties that are relevant to the code that you have, and you can use it to find whatever it is that you want to find. So an example, a sort of an example compared to a text search is this. A lot of people are very familiar with this. If you parse a sentence like this using a text search, then you get you it's not that it's devoid of meaning. There, it means something. A panda eats shoots and leaves. Okay, that means something. And if you parse it, you can get something like this. But if you add that comma, which is the Oxford comma, it makes for intelligent parsing. Then you really mean what the sentence, you understand the real meaning of what the sentence is supposed to be. So now you have three verbs there: eats, shoots, and leaves. And that's kind of what ScriptDOM does in comparison to a text parsing, is to build a tree that shows you the second option. Like, you know exactly what is what, where you find, as opposed to a blind parsing of something with no meaning attached. So a scientific method of finding what you want to find. That's what it is. And you can use this abstract syntax tree to find patterns. So now we are going to explore this abstract syntax tree and how it looks. How shall so what I have here is a simple select statement, and I'm doing here whatever I did in the with the parsing. I'm just creating, parsing it for errors. And before I get into explaining any of this, let's see for a second what it creates. So what I do here is, I'm going to see what this object looks like. So this is what we call the abstract syntax tree that it has created. What it has created here is a batches thing that holds the details of all. This is considered one batch. Under it, you would have statements. So it's a very hierarchical model. And batches is the first thing here. And then it is giving you the start, offset. It's giving you the length of the fragment, the entire length of the fragment here, the line and the column. And then you have the script token stream, and we'll get into tokens a little bit later. Tokens are like every word in your script makes for a token, and this becomes a stream, and each token has a token type and a token text. And tokens have their place. You can just use the script token stream for a few things, like if you have um, if you have a case where your reserved words are in lowercase and you want them to be uppercase, then those are some of the situations where you can, or you want to identify what are comments in your code. Those are the kind of situations where this token stream can be useful, and I'll show an example of that, yeah, later on in the demo. But this is typically what the abstract syntax tree looks like. And if you go one level further, if you go down to the batches, then you can see that it has statements, and it tells you that the first statement is a select statement. Now, these things are going to be the same at every level of the tree: the offset, the fragment length, and the script token stream, and the token index, and all of that. The values are going to change, but they're going to be the same. But the first part, you can dig deeper and deeper down the tree for that. So if you go down further, we have just one batch. So I'm going to say batch is 0, and first statement of that, again a lot of array structures too, you have to learn to navigate that too. So now you can see the details of the select statement. You can see the query expression, the compute clause. If you used a CTE, it's going to show that the details of that CTE here. And if you have a hint at the query level, that it's going to show you the hint there. And then again, these things are the same. So this is how you keep going lower and lower into the tree. So if you go down to the query expression, you can see even further. You can see the row filter, you can see the select elements, the from clause, the where clause, all of that. So that's how it kind of splits. Each of this is a node, and under the node you have further details of what it means and the properties and methods that are connected with it. So basically, the abstract syntax tree itself, depending on how big your code is, as you can see, it has this much details just for one select statement. So if you have a stored procedure, you can imagine how big this is going to get. Like really huge, you have to go down layer by layer by layer, unpeeling it like an onion. And people don't write code in the same way. Some people may write it, put a begin and an end and wrap it in the middle. Other people may have some other ways of writing it. So if you have to come up with code that has to dig down this tree like manually, it's going to take you like, a lot of coding. So I try to do some of that here to find what are the, I have two no lock ends in the select statement. I'm going to try and find where they are in the abstract syntax tree by doing that peeling of the onion. So what I do here is, for I go statement by statement and I find out what is the statement, and then I go to a table, and the way the tables are stored is in a recursive form in pairs. Table 1 connects to table 2, table 2 connects to table 3, table 3 connects to table 4, and so on. So I need to recurse through that to find out what the tables are. And if I run my code again, right, so it does all that stuff and it found my hints for me. So hint found at line 10, column 226. So hint found again in another place. So this is how it works. If you want, you can absolutely find what you want to find by doing this. It's just it gets very cumbersome over, depending on how much code you have. You have to code your way through it, and you may miss certain branches of the tree. You may not find certain things. So let's see how we get around that kind of issues. So we can see tokens too before I go on to the next one and how they work. So tokens are essentially each word in the script is broken into a type and a text. And I have a comment here and I have a select statement. And what I'm doing here is again parsing it, and then I take the token stream and I see what it has. I look for the text and I look for the type basically and what it is. So if I run this, so it's telling me here, it's really, really nice. It's telling me that the type is a single line comment. This is a single line comment. And the text is what I put here, that's testing tokens, and all the rest of it. Select is of type select, and the line and the column. Then you have a white space, that is, whatever it is, it's empty and it is two, and it's just a space and then a star. So like this it goes on, and you have all this information at every level of the tree. You can use it to find stuff, a sort of a text search. If you like, you can do that, and you can use it for other reasons like finding comments or for finding what case a certain reserved word is, and so on. So this is how tokens work, and whatever you see here, the script token stream, it contains all this kind of information. So I just showed you the long-winded way of finding it. So given how cumbersome that process is, we need to look at something called a visitor class, which is a design pattern that's been implemented for specifically for this purpose, to find these things easier. So if you consider an analogy, if you want to find all the locations of nolock in your code, consider it to be an apple. And if you have to find it manually, you have to go climbing the tree and picking an apple from every branch where you can find one. It's pretty labor intensive, it's pretty time consuming, and you may miss a few. Another option you have is by using a sort of a tool like that. Now, that is similar to the kind of browsing the abstract syntax tree, like I said. You write code to go branch to branch to branch and you check if there is something there. It's definitely more efficient compared to manually looking at something. Still, the chances of your missing something are quite probable given how many branches there are, and you have to look at every branch to find whether or not it has the fruit you need. So chances that you may miss a few branches are pretty high, and this is also labor intensive. Well, how about you had a machine like that that's going to shake the tree and get all the apples which are ripe enough to drop without your going to every branch and checking it out like that. Now that's kind of what the visitor class is like, which is, if you provide it an instance of the class, it's a backdoor way of saying, hey, go and find all the no locks for me. It's going to visit your code and check every line. Okay, well, is this relevant for this? Does it have a no lock here? Is this a table? And no, is this does it have an alias? Does it have a no lock? Okay, it has a no lock. This person is looking for a no lock. Let me return this. So that's kind of what it does. And chances of this thing missing anything unless you made a mistake with coding, it does not happen. So it is like super efficient and also super fast with what it does. That's what it's meant to do. So let's look at an efficient way of using ScriptDOM, which is using the visitor class. So here we go. What we do is basically the first few steps are essentially the same. So what I do here is I create a new object of the parser and then parser errors, and I make sure whatever I pass to it is free of errors. And then the fragment or the abstract syntax tree that I create, I pass to the visitor class, which is like here. What is that? Okay, here. So what I do here, this is what a visitor class is about. I create an instance and I define the class. This is the base class. When I remember, I talked about the important classes. The fragment visitor is one of them. So I create a base class here. And then I pass it a parameter. I say I want to find, give me table hints. So if I say table hint here, it knows, okay, I have to go and find the table hint. And I create an instance of this. And then the accept method is what invokes this. And if I go here, then you get, if it finds something that matches what I have, it finds all the hints here. And if I want to find a specific kind of hint, then I have to say hint kind equals no lock. Now, what is important is that this kind of syntax is what you can only learn by browsing the tree somewhat, because that's why learning to understand how to browse the tree is so important, because there is not much of I think this hint kind is documented, but a lot of stuff is not documented. So if you want to find the specific property that you have to use for things like that, then you may have to do some research with manually browsing the tree. But once you find it, writing code is like seriously easy. Okay, now I know that it is equal to no lock, so this is what I get. And I'm going to run it for you and show you how it works. So find the no lock hint. I'm going to do this. And what I have here again is a procedure with a few no locks in it. And I'm going to just call this here. So it's the same thing that it did there, except that it found it a lot easier than it did with just 3 or 4 lines of code. So another example, a similar example is select star, for example. In this case, what we do instead of that table thing, we just call it a select star expression. And then it's going to tell you select star found at blah. All it does is once it gets in here, you know that it's found a select star. So you can do your warnings likewise. So create an instance of this and say you ask it to find the specific expression you ask it to find, and then it will find it for you. So So I have a star here. So it's telling you that it found the select star at this location. Really simple. Another example is to find a four-part name, a linked server reference, which most of us don't like. But if we want to find them, and this is a little bit more nuanced because ScriptDOM doesn't know what exactly is a linked server reference by default. You have to look for four-part naming patterns, and in this you have to find the table reference and see how many parts the table reference has. Now, it has a base identifier, a server identifier, and if you are specifically saying it's a server identifier, chances are pretty high that it's a linked server reference. So we go back here and I specifically introduced a linked server reference here. I'm going to see if it finds it. So there it is, it found it. So table orders with linked server, my server has found. Then the last example is reserved words that are not uppercase. And this is where your tokens come in handy. So you parse the tokens just like I showed before, and there is you can just filter out the stuff that you have integer, multi-line comment, single line comment, whatever identifier, blah, all these things, variables, right? And then what you have is a reserved word. And then if it has a capital or not a capital, then it's going to tell you. Or whatever your convention may be in that regard. So you have a from and an insert that are not in uppercase, so it's found those two things for you. So that is the more efficient way of using it is by using the visitor class and such. Any questions, Kevin?
Looks like no questions in chat.
Okay. So the next usage we have is by using it as a formatter. I'll show you that in a minute. So the formatting thing comes with a number of options. So most of these things are accepted as good practices, but if you for any reason if you don't like them, then you have a choice to turn it off. Some of them include semicolons, align class bodies, align the column definition fields, align set clause item as keyword on its own line, all this kind of stuff. There is a lot of different options that it has. So what it does is the same thing. It has to, the parser is at the heart of this thing. So you have to parse whatever, everything that if you have to use it, you have to use the parser class. So you take the output of that and then you use what is called a generate method and generate script. So that thing will format your script for you and throw out the output based on whatever options that you've selected here. And let's see an example. This I have basically an unformatted file. Show you. So I put a bunch of stuff here. My formatting is totally messed up. It's not aligned. It's just messy to read, difficult to read. So what I want to do is to pass it to this and see what it can do. So this is my call. So you can see that you get a neatly aligned output. I don't like this here, this insert columns here. That is not acceptable to me, but that's how it works. Sadly, it does not align columns for an insert. But otherwise, it's pushed things out and it makes it neatly aligned. And the biggest issue with this, though, is that it's going to strip your code of comments. It is an open item that I have asked Arvind, the project manager, to open, and he's following up on that. If any of you watching, if you think it's going to be useful, there is a link on my presentation. Please, please, please go and upload this thing so that they'll fix it for you. If they fix it, then there are more ways we can put this to use, including fixing some of the problems that it finds. But the main issue is with the generator right now is that it is going to strip your code of comments, and that is a big no. At least in the environment I work in, it's a big no. If it's acceptable to you, then it works fine as a formatter. It's really useful, and I like the output that it has. Another feedback item that I've also given them is the way it aligns the columns with an insert, like this kind of messy stuff. So this is another thing that they have to work on, but more or less, it does a decent job otherwise without that.
So Mala, if you put the comments on a separate line, would that work?
No, whatever, it strips the code of comments. So wherever you put it, it doesn't matter. Really sucks that way. One thing you can do is if your header is the only significant part of what you want to retain, then there is a way around that. Like you can use the tokens to add your header back and regenerate it. But the comments in the body of your code are going to be gone. Not a good thing, I know. But otherwise it works okay. If that's not a big deal for you, if your code is relatively new, you don't have a lot of history, you just want it formatted and such, then by all means, it's a really sweet way of formatting and very easy to use. Using ScriptDOM to fix what it finds, this is a big one. So it can fix some of the issues. The main thing about fixing is that it's a good idea not to use it to add new things in, because I tried some of that stuff out. It's a little odd. I haven't researched it entirely, but I'm not thrilled with what I found in that regard. You can use it to remove something that is not needed, like for example the nolock hint. um, that way it works. And the problem again is that it uses the generator that I just showed you, and the generator strips the body of the code of comments. So if that is okay though to pay as a price for it, then it can do a decent job. And I will just walk you through the code where you can fix some of these problems. So this is the fragment that you pass to it, which is the abstract syntax tree that the parser builds. And then you create a visitor class, which is a name table reference in our case, because we are looking for a nolock and you found a nolock. What you essentially do is to use the fragment and you call this remove method to remove the hint. Once you found the hint, you remove it. And then what you have to do is to regenerate it, that is using the same thing that does the formatting. Once you regenerate the script, call the generate script method and regenerate it, then your output will be free of nolock hints. So it's really nice to use. If they didn't have that one issue with getting rid of the comments in the code, it's a really convenient, easy way to clean your code of things like that, of no lock hints. And there are specific scenarios where you can use it. Of course, you should not use it like randomly like that, because it's going to mess up your code. But in specific cases, like in this case, it's a very legitimate use of this thing. So I'll show you an example here.
While you're prepping that example, there's a question here in chat.
Uh-huh.
Can the input be streamed and have it parse or process lines at a time, or maybe a batch at a time? Or will it only take in the entire script or file? Like if you have a 20 megabyte script, would it load that entirely into memory, or can you have batches handled?
It depends on what you mean by Let me think. It does load whatever you send. Though the script that you send is loaded into memory, and it can be memory intensive if you have a really big, a large script, an enormous script. Uh, but I don't know of a way of loading scripts partially unless you want to break it into two different types of files and do it. But as of now, yeah, it does load the entire script into memory, and it can be a little stressful on memory if your script is like abnormally large. Does that answer the question, Kevin?
I think so. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so we'll just see how it's going to fix the script. I think Arvind even had a number on how big your script can be before it finds it, it taxes your memory. I can go and find that maybe in today. It's like some, a really enormous script. But yeah, that is a problem. It has to load your script into memory for it to do the parsing and such. So I have a no lock here, and I have, I want these things gone. So I'm going to call that thing. Okay, it had, I thought I had it there. Okay, then uncomment that. Okay. So the output is free of no locks. As you can see, the stock items had a no lock. That's gone. That the one on top had a no lock. My DBO orders, that's gone. So it'll clean it out. It does a great job. I can also show you an example. I'll just put a comment there. See, your comment is gone as well. That is the problem. Is that when you have a comment here and it takes away the comments. But otherwise, it does a decent job with regenerating your script for you. And if that is your need, then there is a way around it. And if the only place where you need to keep your comments is your procedure header, then you can use the tokenizing, tokens to add your header back. Tokens identify your header as a multi-line comment, and then you can just parse the token stream and then regenerate it that way. So there is a bit of a workaround, but not entirely. And these things are pretty dicey to add back by using the token stream and such. It's really tough. So I wouldn't recommend doing it. But the header is doable. And I like it a lot. If they only fix that one problem, then it's very usable. And not just for no log, there are a few use cases for this as well. Sorry about that.
Now we've reached the intermission of our show.
So let's look at some of the pros and cons of this. The main pros and cons, as we've seen already, is that it's an authentic scientific method. Right now, the library ships along with the engine, so it is modified for every change you have, and there is a different version for every version of SQL Server. And then it's really easy. It's just PowerShell scripts that you have. You can code for whatever specific pattern you need to find, and it's really easy to deploy and maintain. And if you're like some DBAs are, even if you're averse to .NET programming and such, you better know a bit of PowerShell if you're a DBA in today's world. So knowing that, and actually it's a good way of even learning the .NET framework that way, because it's really very simple, the kind of code you have to write for this once you understand how it works. So many advantages that way. And it's fully backward compatible, asynchronous. You don't need any active SQL server installed to run it. Definitely it needs you to know some programming skills. And if you have nuanced situations, like if you have a certain class will not have all the properties that you need, you may need to invoke multiple visitors for finding everything that you need. um, like for example, I found one of the rules I had was about aliasing, finding aliases, queries without aliases. Now if you have just one table, who cares whether that's aliased or not in a query? It really doesn't matter. So but DOM doesn't know by default that it's just a one table query, so you may have to write some code around things like that. And nuanced situations can take a little bit more programming than usual. And the formatter need, I already said that the formatter needs to retain comments, and I keep giving them a hard time around it. For you, if you want to use it as a way to format your code or to clean up your code of some of the things, it needs to retain comments. So those are some of the specific disadvantages to using it. That's literally all. Otherwise, it's like really easy. It's very much not known and underused for whatever reason. But as a DBA, it's a really good tool for you to have to improve the quality of your code, and make code reviews a little bit easier than they are otherwise are. This is a whole bunch of different references. Dan Guzman's blog, that's usually the starting point for a lot of us. And Arvind has a YouTube talk, and he has a few blog posts on this too. Um, Aaron Bertrand has been blogging a little bit on using it, and finding some nuanced coding patterns. So his blog posts are also worth reading. And I've done one episode with SQL Data Partners discussing how this tool works, and I've also written an article for SQL Server Central. Also be delivering a few more talks next year on with different conferences and user groups on this. So that's pretty much it.
All right. Thank you, Mala. So there's a question in chat. Is
Uh-huh.
this on GitHub to check out?
Not yet, but I'll put it there.
All right. And I did also link to Arvind's repo where he's got some ScriptDOM examples.
Right, he does. His examples are largely in C sharp, but if you know enough coding to make that into partial, then yeah, go ahead by all means.
Yeah, and another question here,
Mhm.
or at least a comment. Preserving comments would be useful from our perspective, but I don't have high hopes for it happening, as it makes it incredibly more difficult to parse, given that code can be in comments, and reformatting code might possibly allow for introducing bugs.
I'm not sure I understood that fully.
Yeah, I could
How do you think that would introduce bugs?
well, eh, thinking about it in terms of dealing with code in comments, I
Yeah.
I could see that being tricky just because of the way that uh, the double slash comment or the double hyphen comment is read in T-SQL.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you've got one line, for example, and you have a comment with a double hyphen in the middle of it,
Hmm.
originally it was on multiple lines. If it gets reshaped to
Oh,
one
that
line,
way. Oh, I see what they mean. Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. I think, instead of embedded comments, if they at least kept comments that are on specific, separate lines, that would be helpful. I can pass for embedded comments, maybe.
yeah, or if you're using the backslash asterisk method of saying multi-line comments or specifically linked comment, uh,
Right, right.
beginning and end.
Hmm.
And yeah, Solomon's on the same page. The idea of was placed on a line after an inline comment. Yeah, especially if reformatting changes the number of line breaks.
Right. No, that's the main problem. I get that. I get that with changing the line breaks, and that they don't know where to reintroduce it, which is fair to me. But it just makes the usage very limited.
That's true.
Yeah.
That is true.
Yeah.
So it looks like if there are any more comments or questions, definitely interested in getting it from chat. And in the meantime, I do want to mention that, like I said at the beginning of the show, we are going to call it a year after this. And we'll be back in January with more episodes of Shop Talk, more user group meetings. We'll have our schedule, meetup.com/trypass. So also, SQL Server allows for embedded block comments, as in block comments within block comments, which are also messy. That's true. It's helpful.
Yeah.
It's helpful because, hey, I can comment out an entire block of code even if there are block comments in there. But it does
Right.
make the parsing situation a little require a bit more thought from the standpoint of a developer who's building a parser or editor.
Right.
But, at the same time, well, the query engine does this.
Uh-huh.
So that's a solved problem. If you use
So
the same
actually what from two versions what I heard is that the parser used in SSMS is actually the same as this one. That might have changed, but what I heard, what they said was that the parser is the same thing. And why they have multiple versions of stuff doing the same thing, I really don't know. But I heard that the parser is the same as ScriptDOM,
yeah,
the SSMS parser. Yeah,
I'd say different teams maybe.
yeah,
It does make it impossible to, or nearly impossible to parse via regex. That's true. Regular
yeah.
expressions would be very difficult to handle in that regard.
Right,
But at the same time, um, regular expressions also isn't the only way to do parsing. You could have token based looking for block comments,
right.
which I'm gonna guess is probably similar to how the parsing engine works on it today. Because,
Hmm.
like I said, it's a solved problem. It's something that they know how to do.
Right.
It's a lexical processor problem, not too hard to manage.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, this is where all of us wish that we hadn't fallen asleep during a compiler class. Actually, I avoided compiler class. In retrospect, I wish I'd taken it. But the me of however many years ago wasn't ready for compilers.
I remember standing in line when I started my career with COBOL. So you were given 3 passes at the compiler. You better get your code right. Stand in line with a floppy disk in hand for your turn at the compiler.
So I'm not saying one should use regex to parse SQL, just that so many people try in vain. Yeah, that's true. Regular expressions are the first thing that a lot of people think of when I have a textual problem I need to deal with. And as the old joke goes, I have a problem. I've used regular expressions. Now I have 2 problems.
Using T-SQL to analyze T-SQL is kind of to me, okay?
Well, that goes, actually, that's right in the spirit of SQL, where you have the idea of all metadata should be described in terms of the SQL language itself, which is how we get things like information schema instead of having specialized lookup lists or other data structures that are required to be accessed using some other language.
Hmm.
I think it's a really, really good thing to have in a domain-specific language where
Mm-hmm.
you can describe everything about the language that is necessary to diagnose and solve problems within the language itself.
Hmm. But that also comes with its sets of issues, right, Kevin?
Oh, sure. I mean,
Yeah.
you have things that are not easy to describe within a domain-specific language.
Right.
Think about iterating through lists. That's
Mm-hmm.
something that, especially in T-SQL, we have a really tough time with.
Mm-hmm.
But the ability to say all of my system tables, all of my dynamic management views, all of these diagnostic tools are available within the language itself, that I don't have to use a PowerShell script necessarily to get to a lot of the stuff. That ideal, I think, is really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And
agree,
when Mala refers to a floppy disk, that was back when they were actually floppy. I remember those. Now the question is 5 1/4 or 8 1/2. CLR was supposed to help us with all this, right? Well, CLR helps with some other stuff. Ironically enough, since we were talking regular expressions, yeah, it does help with regular expressions a lot. Ask Solomon about that, and let me drop a link to SQL Sharp because I think it's worth the free plug for Solomon. So SQLsharp.com. There you go. Link in chat. Very useful library. And I'm not saying that just because I'm getting paid. Okay, so I think that probably just about does it.
All right. I finished much earlier than I thought, which I'm not surprised at all. But
you got a full hour out of it.
yes.
So perfect time, really good time for a regular session sometime in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So all right, everybody. Hopefully you
have a great evening and a happy holiday season. We'll see you all in January.
What she said. Till next time, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you around.